So, welcome one and all.
La conferenza è bonus practice.
If you could mute your microphones, that would be great. I'm Rob. If you can see any open mics, perhaps you can mute them for me. Except Terry and me, of course. It'd be a bit difficult if we can't talk to each other. I have known Terry for actually quite a long time. I should think around 25 years. And I have to say, he's one of the people I in terms of what he is able to do on the mat, is one of the most impressive gentlemen I've ever seen.
Okay.
Last time I saw him was actually at your 50th anniversary, Terry.
Oh, yes.
And you showed up pretty much just after you had had your hips replaced. I'm not quite sure whether you literally went up to the mat on your crutches and threw them down, but pretty much you did.
Well, they told me that I should wait 6 weeks, but I waited 5 weeks. So.
Well, you were magnificent that day, I have to tell you. It was very, very impressive. So 7th Dan, Shihan, been practicing for over 50 years. When did you actually start?
I started in 1963. Actually, a friend of mine had been badgering me. He was practicing aikido. He's been badgering me for probably 2 years. And I just said, no, not interested, not interested. And basically, in a kind way, just to shut him up, I went with him once. And I was really intrigued, and I got the bug right away, and that was it. But it took me 2 years to get there.
Just think, if it started then, you'd be in your 60th year now.
True, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your family background.
My family background, well, mother and father, brother, not much to tell really. I was born when I was quite young. Usual stuff.
Were you born around where you live now?
Not far, yes.
Right.
My mother came from Liverpool. My father was a ship's engineer, and he was brought up in India, in Calcutta, after spending some time in, where was it?
Shanghai.
Shanghai in China. He was actually born in China in the French sector.
Yeah.
So he served his apprenticeship as an engineer in the Royal Naval Dockyards in Calcutta.
So am I right in thinking that there is a sort of family connection to Eastern Europe?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
China and the Middle East as well, somewhere way back in history.
Right. And so where does the name Ezra come from? Because it doesn't sound very English.
Well, when people usually ask me that, and where does the name Ezra come from, I usually say, oh, it's from my father. But I won't say that today. It's actually a biblical name, and it comes originally from Iran, as far as I know.
All right.
There's the book of Ezra in the Bible.
Fair enough. That's pretty good lineage, I would say.
That is it.
Yeah. So when you started Aikido, what was it about it that grabbed you?
The people that were involved were very enthusiastic, and also at that time, Aikido was presented to the public and practitioners as almost a mystical art, as in mysticism, and the concept of ki was really intriguing. The senior instructor at that time was a very, very nice gentleman called Fred Wainwright, and he had been part of the Allied occupying forces in Japan just after the Second World War, and actually trained with O-sensei for quite a time while he was at the old Humbu dojo. And he told me that when he was leaving, O-sensei said to him, please go back to your country and teach and spread Aikido. So I was very fortunate indeed to have this connection with O-sensei from one way or another. At the time, Naro Sensei was he was the Uchideshi from Humbu that was in charge of teaching in Europe at that time. And he would come maybe every 3 months. And when I saw him, I was so impressed. Just him standing there with his waikikogi, white hakama, and the red ties or red belt, and he looked like an extended version of the Japanese flag somehow, but very, very impressive. I remember seeing him doing Suwari techniques, and I thought to myself at the time,
These on the internet.
sorry?
Someone mute your microphone, please. Mark, can you mute it?
So I remember seeing him doing techniques in Suwari, and it occurred to me at the time that if him and I were to have a race and he was on his knees and I was standing up, he'd probably win. He was so beautifully nimble and agile on his knees. And later on, when I got my 6th cue with him and a few other people, I had to do what probably resembles a breakfall and a very bad shironagi. And he graded us to 6th cue, and he told us, "You are the instructors of the future." And I thought, no chance. But anyway, there I am.
So did you did you have ambitions to teach from an early age?
No, I had no ambitions whatsoever. I just found myself at some point, well, several points, when the instructor didn't turn up after I'd been practicing a couple of years, I just found myself teaching, filling in for him. And then later on, filling in for other teachers, quite simply. And then one particular teacher left altogether, and I found myself somewhat in charge, as it were. But I just took that as part of the natural flow of things, and it didn't seem particularly important at the time. But I think, as you all know, once you start teaching, you have to really think about what you're doing. So it's a great help to me.
Yeah. So did you think that the reasons you liked aikido, have they changed over the year, the reasons why you were passionate about it to start with and now?
When I was a young man, I was very, very active, full of energy. I was also doing weight training. And although people obviously at the time said Aikido is about harmony, it was anything but. And we used to just smash each other with brute force at the time. And we could take it because we were young and fit. And then Chiba Sensei came, and it was not the same, but similar. And he used to call me strong boy. And when he wanted me to say, okay, he'd say, "Oi, strong boy, come." Then one day he said to me, "Why you do Aikido and lift weights?" And I said quite innocently, "Well, Sensei, I really enjoy Aikido and I enjoy lifting weights." And he said, "You will not enjoy Aikido today." And he just beat me up, gave me concussion. And to tell you the truth, I had to stop Aikido for 3 months. I really had that concussion. I didn't go to hospital with it, but I could hardly walk straight. But I came back and he just said to me, "Where have you been?" I just said, "Oh, I've been busy, Sensei." And then I started up and haven't stopped since.
So that's quite a harsh lesson. What did you learn from that, other than you have a very strong mind?
There were several situations like that where, first of all, I'd like to say I have and always will have the greatest love and respect for Chiba Sensei. But sometimes he did, looking back, was the most outrageous things to me. And I remember once I was taking a kemi for him, and while I was holding him, he started to talk to the class. And I was concentrating, and suddenly, without warning, he chopped me in the throat, boom, like this, took me right off my feet. And I couldn't breathe, and my Adam's apple was somewhere else. And I was writhing about on the floor, and people had to come and revive me. And lots of things similar to that happened. He broke my arm, dislocated my jaw. And sometimes I never told him sometimes when he broke my arm or dislocated my shoulders or elbows. I didn't let him know. Just carried on. What did he get from that? Hard to say. Resilience, let's say, to keep on going no matter what. Chiba Sensei somehow probably saw himself as a samurai, maybe the last of the samurai, and he kind of advocated that. And I was going along with it, and I was going, yeah, that's great. And now when I look back and I think, how stupid. My body's a little bit wrecked these days, and I suffer from those injuries now that I got them. But in lots of ways, I wouldn't change anything. It was great.
So who was the most influential teacher for you, or teachers if you want?
Well, it would be teachers, because at different stages of my aikido, there were very influential people at that time. And of course, in the beginning, Mr. Wainwright, what a wonderful man. And then a good friend of his, Ken Cottier, who lived very close to us, used to come back from Japan and teach us. And he was a real gentleman and really very impressive man, and gave us a lot. Then obviously Chief Sensei came, and he influenced me greatly. I was with him for a period of about 11 years. I used to go to weekend courses. I used to sell some of my possessions in order to go to courses all over the country, maybe Scotland, London, Midlands, different places. Then after that, Kanetsuka Sensei, who I spent quite some time with, and also I was privileged to spend a lot of time with Sekiya Sensei, who was Shiba Sensei's father-in-law, but the Aikido was different, like chalk and cheese, totally different. Sekiya Sensei was a student of Yamaguchi Sensei. And when I first saw Yamaguchi Sensei, that really, really changed my idea of Aikido. And I realized that Aikido being an art of harmony, the way we were practicing up until that time, the way I was practicing, there was the philosophy on one side and the actual practice on the other side, and they were very, very far away from each other. And since that time, I've been trying to bring the actual philosophy of Aikido and the practice of Aikido together, so there's eventually, there should be no separation between the philosophy and the actual practice.
I find you a very interesting mix, because I knew that you came from kind of the school of hard knocks, and that you'd had quite a story with Chiba to tell. But I always think of you as being quite spiritual in the way that you feel about Aikido. And you strike me as a really down-to-earth, salt of the earth sort of fella. And I'm wondering how that came about.
I was actually, yes, you're very perceptive. I was very lucky, very privileged. Years ago, there was a man in our area who claimed to be a spiritual healer. And I was totally skeptical, especially knowing the man's history. I thought, what a scallywag. I thought, what a, he's conning everybody. And because a long story short, I found myself once in one of his sessions, and I was totally blown away. There were people in trance states, altered states of consciousness, doing the most amazing things. He was healing people. And then when I received this healing, I went into an altered state of consciousness, a deep trance state, and that just blew me away. And it was feeling like nothing else I've ever experienced. Also, he introduced me to the concept of Kundalini. I don't know whether you've ever heard of this, but for instance, Sensei's claim that he was covered in golden light is or was a high level of Kundalini experience. So I really believe Sensei, when he is quoted as saying that he was covered in golden light, I've had, I won't say the same experience, but a very, very powerful experience, which lead me to believe those things totally. So the thing that helped me the most is that I found myself practicing by myself sometimes, going into altered states of consciousness and having information and ability at the time, which I would not normally have. And this has been an ongoing thing with me. So over the years, I've been practicing Kundalini regularly, been practicing Kotodama regularly, as well as Zazen. And these things have helped me enormously.
I wanted to ask you about Kotodama because, again, it's something I know that you're very strong on, and it's something I've always struggled to relate to, really. So how did you find it, and what do you find to be the benefits?
Chiba Sensei arranged for a Zen priest to come over, and we called him Osho-san. His name was Hogen. And I became very, very good friends with him. I stayed at his monastery in Japan. And part of the process of Zen at the time with him was chanting some of the sutras. And when I was chanting by myself, I found myself sometimes entering an altered state of consciousness, and I would start to chant in a different way altogether, and incredible flows of energy would be hitting me and flowing through me, and it just started off like that. So through a little bit of trial and error, and also chanting in an altered state of consciousness, I have evolved a program of Kotodama chanting, which includes sutras, but also single sounds, single tones. And the benefits are many, really. For a start, there's your breathing from your tanden, chanting from your tanden, toning from your tanden. And I think that scientifically, scientists are saying that everything is created by vibration and sound. And I'm believing this more and more. And I've had a lot of terrific experiences through chanting. Also, sometimes chanting, I have gone into Kundalini states where there's been terrific flows of energy, and in one case left me crying. To tell you the truth. I think it can be very, very important indeed. For instance, there are some sounds that really would nauseate you. There are sonic weapons which can kill you. And at the opposite end of the spectrum, there are beautiful sounds that make you feel calm, make you feel happy. And when you're toning these sounds, then each level of consciousness has its own sound. Each organ in your body has its own sound. Each thought has its own sound. And that's my practice.
How does that translate actually into your practice on the mat? Is it something that you can draw on and provide inspiration and energy when you're on the mat?
Yes, I would say so. And I find, like lots of other teachers, excuse me, for instance, will find themselves as executing a technique as well as breathing out, making strange sounds. The one I usually make is a zoo, and that sound is supposed to represent harmony between yourself and your surroundings and other creatures, beings, people around you. So by toning as you move, you create a harmony that is more than physical, which is emotional.
I'm right in thinking that Kotodama is actually sort of kind of a part of the structure of your teaching, isn't it? It's a regular feature.
We have Kotodama classes, but I don't actually teach Kotodama as such in a regular class. Right. I see Kotodama as a kind of all-embracing science. For instance, a baby crying, someone screaming after hitting their thumb with a hammer. It's all Kotodama. It's all making the sound that fits the situation, for instance. But I don't actually teach Kotodama as such during lessons. We have separate classes for that.
So, of course, Aikido started in Japan. Do you now see it as a Japanese art or an international art?
Well, yes, I see this as an international art, and I see it as a wholesome art that all human beings can be part of. And it's very, very beautiful, very special. I was watching a video of Chiba Sensei yesterday, some time before he died. And I think one of the things he said was that Aikido actually was very delicate as well as being very precious. And we should be very, very careful not to lose Aikido and not let it become diluted. I was with him in Ireland quite some time ago, many, many years ago, and he called me over and he just said that to me. He said, Terry, don't let Aikido become diluted. Then he said, go and sit down, go away. And that's just what he wanted to say to me. So I thought I'd mention that.
So in terms of, have you, do you adjust your teaching for the culture you're in, or do you stick very strictly to the way you were taught?
I don't stick to the way I was taught at all, one little bit. It may be a little bit controversial me saying this, but I think that mainstream Aikido is very, very special indeed, very, very valuable to humanity, but should be just a platform from which to develop further. So really, it doesn't really matter what country I'm in, but I usually have the tone of the class to the atmosphere created by the people in that class at that moment, at that time, no matter what country they're coming from, whether this country or Russia or South America or anywhere else. So I try to feel the level of energy and work with that.
So you mentioned that you saw an important link between the practice of Aikido and the development of self, and I guess that extends out into society at large.
Absolutely.
How, I mean, I would say that maybe Aikido, you'll have seen Aikido grow hugely over the years. So instead of having to travel hours to find a club, kind of there's one in every town, and quite a few. Go to somewhere like Cambridge, there's 5 or 6. Seem to have really translated off the mat into mainstream society. Where are we going wrong?
Are we going wrong?
Are we going wrong? That's a good question too.
Yeah. I think that we have lived through a kind of golden age of Aikido, to tell you the truth. And it seems to be, excuse me, fading away at the moment. And most young people are concerned with image, how they look. Many young people quite simply don't like being asked or told what to do. People are not so resilient as they used to be. When I was young, if there was something difficult to do, you were just told to get on with it and stop complaining. If you approach young people with that attitude these days, they'll walk out of the door. So it's a difficult one.
Do you have a youth group within your club?
Yes, I have a very, very nice junior club. They're wonderful. I love them. They're great. And they put up with.
So what do you do then to accommodate the fact that they are not the children that you were when you first started Aikido?
Again, obviously I try to respect them and just gently push them over their limits or what they think are their limits, whereas years ago we would throw them over what they thought they were limits. So we're much more gentle in our approach these days. But the junior class I have at the moment are, for me, very, very special. I think they're great. I'm really happy with them.
Wonderful. And what do you see the main benefits of studying Aikido as? So what's it given you?
What hasn't it given me? I used to be a lot taller, before I started Aikido. What's it given me? Well, it's given me an Aikido life, the opportunity to meet wonderful people, to practice Aikido in harmony most of the time with very, very special people. I've always, I would say over the last 40 years at least, I've somehow been spiritually driven to practice Aikido, in that I don't think I had a choice. And it's just given me so many wonderful experiences. I've had the chance to travel abroad, meeting great people, to start my own dojo with all its ups and downs. But I've had a wonderful, wonderful life. I've had many situations, for instance, where I've nearly been killed, really, really, at least 10 times, where I've nearly died in certain situations. And Aikido has pulled me through all of those. So it's ongoing. And I just, especially through the practice of Aikido, feel so glad to be alive. I'm not vegetating anywhere. I'm just practicing as much as I can and always have. And I just love what I'm doing.
Which brings us quite nicely to where we are at now. So here we are in lockdown and we cannot practice in the normal ways. Have you kept your practice going during that time?
To tell you the truth, I've spent the last, let's say, 40 years kind of non-stop, including weekends, going abroad, taking weekend courses, stuff like that. And I have to be honest with you that in some ways, I'm enjoying the rest. I'm lying in sometimes, enjoying the rest, but I'm making sure that I go to the dojo at least every other day and practice an hour or hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours by myself. And I'm still looking forward, still trying to, what's the word? Still trying to gain a continuity of consciousness to refine my continuity of consciousness, which includes body consciousness and mindfulness, self-observation, stuff like that, through my own personal practice. One of the spin-offs of the Kundalini was when I was in an altered state of consciousness many years ago. I found myself driven just to get 2 iron spheres. And when I found them through the drive that the Kundalini had given me, I worked out a method of using the iron spheres in order to somewhat master things like gravity, centrifugal force, stuff like that. So these days when I'm teaching, very often I will tell people to try to create a gravitational field towards the attacker and to attack or to receive the attack centrifugally, whilst not separating with the attack, stuff like that. Also using Bokken and Jo, especially using a heavy Jo and a heavy Bokken. I'm really talking big stuff here, heavy stuff. When I'm using a heavy Bokken, heavy Jo, I try to take a kemi from my Jo, from my Bokken. So for instance, if you're taking normal kemi when someone throws you, as you take a kemi, you should minimize the amount of strain that you feel. And when you're using a really big, heavy Jo or a big, heavy Bokken, it's the same thing. So instead of using brute force, trying as much as possible to use centralized energy from your tendon, of course, and using centrifugal, centripetal force and the forces of gravity. So just practicing by myself with big stuff really helps. The iron ball technique as well. Oh, Sensei said that he was at one with the universe. Okay, which sounds great. And some people think that him saying that is the ramblings of an idealistic old man. But what if what he's saying is true? So I believe what he was saying was true, and there must be a mechanism to attain this, whether it's spiritually or physically, mentally, emotionally. The way I have found through the Kundalini is to practice certain exercises with iron spheres in my hands. And instead of trying to build muscle, in fact, I tell my students, try not to build muscle. Try to lose muscle. You won't lose muscle, but practice as though you were trying to. And therefore, only using centralized energy to move your iron spheres.
Yeah.
To the point where even if you're going to switch a light off, instead of just reaching up, you swing your arm up, stuff like that. And so when you're intercepting attacks, maybe punches, kicks, shomanichi, yokomanichi, instead of doing so with muscular energy, you do so with centralized energy, gravitationally connecting with your partner.
So for me, this last year has been quite intriguing and much more fruitful than I could possibly have imagined. And I can't wait to get back to the mat and try out certain
Yeah.
things. What about for you?
Whereabouts am I?
No, what about for you in terms of what have you been thinking in this last year? Are you really looking forward to going back and putting it into action and trying new ways of teaching out, et cetera, et cetera?
I'm looking forward to going back very, very much indeed. And over the years, I've worked out a set of protocols using Bokken, Joe, iron spears, or free movement. And these protocols need to be fine-tuned. They need to be honed. And each time I practice by myself, I'm fine-tuning, fine-tuning, fine-tuning. For instance, there's a little known series of exercises using the mirror, full-length mirror. And quite simply, by creating sensation in your hands and feet, and then looking into the mirror and feeling those same sensations, this sounds mad, in your reflection, and learning to look back at yourself from your reflection and gaining a full body consciousness by using the mirror. It's freaky stuff. And in the beginning, it seems like nothing's happening and it won't work. But if you stick with it, it will. But please be careful with this. Some people have reported emotional trauma.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and as you say, it does sound, well, unearthly really, but it's been a very fruitful path for you to travel.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So elbow power is something that you're well known from. Is that also to do with sort of iron ball training?
It is indeed. It's, one little story, which sounds a little bit far-fetched. I was having a problem with one particular student many, many years ago. Quite simply, I couldn't move. He was holding me, I couldn't move. And I tried this way, that way, nothing. And it had just been the day before when I had been involved in Kundalini, and I felt myself, without thinking about it, going into an altered state of consciousness. And suddenly my elbow started to feel as though it was fizzing, a little bit like an Alka-Seltzer or something. I thought, what the heck's going on here? And the more it fizzed, the more I could move. And there's a certain geometry and way of moving that I found joining the left and the right side of your body. But if you move directly from your shoulder or wrist, you still can't move. But by moving from your elbow, the whole thing fits like a special moving jigsaw puzzle. And so it's from this kind of thing that I've developed what people call elbow power. So it's become an integral part of my personal training, even using a Bokken instead of using the action of hitting, which most people use. I'm using an action that actually comes from the tendon and through to the elbows, which creates a really nice cutting action, which when used for techniques like aikido, for instance, it makes things very, very smooth, very clear, and without force.
So if you were training that, how would you describe that to the student in front of you, that you need to link your elbows to do a tanden and this is how it's going to feel, etc.?
Well, really, you need to be in a class with me. Just grab hold of my arm now.
There are people in the world doing that, you know.
Obviously, difficult to describe just talking to you, but there are certain geometric configurations of one's body that are very, very efficient, especially if you align them with your tendon. And these geometric configurations are just not taught. And we find ourselves executing techniques either with our partner's cooperation, which is great, or by just forcing. And by using these geometrical configurations, by creating a gravitational field towards your partner, and by using your energy centrifugally, you'll find that the whole thing turns, even against total resistance, into something very, very different and much more harmonious. So these are the things that I'm constantly working on, constantly upping the game. As I've said, trying to have a continuity of consciousness becoming more and more mindful, becoming more body conscious. Becoming more body conscious is very, very important to me, because if I'm not conscious of my own movements, my own feelings, how can I become conscious of somebody else's feelings? How can I become conscious of their true attack? So by examining yourself very, very deeply, you're actually you're examining somebody else, another human being. We're all human beings.
So as you get older, it's probably fair to say that you don't have the physical strength and athleticism of your youth. And therefore you don't try to use those things. You've learned far more efficient ways of achieving what you want to achieve. How do you go about trying to pass on that wisdom and getting your students to avoid all the mistakes that you made?
Quite simply, I show them what to do. I explain in detail what to do. I'll go around the class and encourage them to do what I'm showing. The problem is that we are all suffering, myself included, from conditioning, and a lot of people won't recognize that. So self-observation is so important, even to be able to observe yourself on an emotional level. For instance, somebody scolds you or is mean to you, you feel something, maybe in the pit of your stomach or your heart. If you fail your driving test, you'll feel an emotional state. And part of what I'm trying to teach is to actually observe these emotional states, step back from them, and learn not to be influenced too much by them, except of course in an emergency.
Yeah.
And so by doing this, by learning to watch yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually even, you'll learn to be able to become flexible and to be in a state of change. So most people just stick to their conditioning. So by forcing, pushing, pulling, and you say, don't pull, use harmony, extend your key, and they say yes, and they go back to the old way that they did it, and they can't escape from this. So part of what I'm trying to do is to teach people how to look at themselves. And the other problem with that is, quite simply, people, when faced with themselves, sometimes don't like what they see. Or if you get someone who's been practicing for 20 years and you show them something that's different, then some people may think, what have I been doing the last 20 years, and get upset with themselves. So it's about letting go, treating each practice as new. Have a beginner's mind, for instance.
So one of the things that's very clear from what you're saying is that much of what you've learned personally, is stuff that you've found out for yourself. I mean, yes, there have been people who lit up the way along the way, but there's an awful lot of your journey that is just self-discovery. You've been your own teacher to a great degree.
Yes, that's very true. But without the power of Kundalini, it wouldn't have happened.
Sure. Well, that's another thing, because you haven't just purely trained down that Aikido route. You've had other influences from other areas of life, spiritualism, if you want to call it that. I don't know if you do yoga at all, but you've brought those into your practice and enhanced your practice.
Yes, I believe so. I feel so privileged to have been able to touch this. You know, it's great. I just want to allow other people to touch it. I want to give it away, but it's very difficult giving this away,
Yeah.
because unfortunately people are very happy with their conditioning.
So what are the areas that I've mentioned a couple there perhaps, but other areas that you've chosen to study and look at and you've found to be very helpful and influential?
As I said earlier, I have found several ways, quite simply, several ways of practicing. Just the mere act of feeling your own hands and your own feet at the same time while you're just practicing. So I have a set of protocols which involve all of the things that I've been talking about this evening, and quite simply just sticking to those protocols open-endedly. If anything else comes in while we're there, then we'll include those. But I have found that these protocols are the key to what is a system that I am using or trying to use. So there we have a system that in one way or another could be said to be foolproof if you stick to the system. The system involves many things, but all through my training, I'm trying to stick to the system, which encompasses a lot of areas. You know? So to go outside of that system for the sake of it doesn't interest me too much. But if I see something that can be included in that system, then I'm going to go for it big time.
Absolutely. You strike me as an excellent example. I'm really getting the impression that you are training 24/7 and that you hardly ever take a moment where there's not a learning opportunity for you.
That's true, yes. But I think an important thing is not to take myself too seriously. What I tell my students is, excuse me, take what you're doing seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. This gives you, just being in this state, gives you much more flexibility of mind.
So I imagine there have been times where students have come up to you and told you things about, I did this and it's because you said that. Can you remember any particular stories that made you feel particularly good?
One of my juniors, many years ago, and I got this story from his father. He was walking along the road on a Saturday afternoon in Birkenhead, and a young man was being beaten up by two other young men. And he told them to stop, and they just took no notice. And he happened to be right next to a fishmonger's. And he just ran into the fishmonger's, grabbed a great big fish by its tail, and whacked these two guys with this fish. This is a true story. And they ran away, probably embarrassed. So that's probably one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, I've heard a few fishing stories, but that one I'm not sure about. And what about in your own life? When have you found off the mat, Aikido just made a colossal difference?
Wow, many times. As I said earlier, I've been I nearly died quite a few times. One of the stories that comes to mind was I was teaching in Colombia, and they very, very kindly took my wife and I on a little bit of a holiday to a place called Cartagena in the northwest of Colombia. And they took us out to an island called Islas Rosario, which is miles into the Pacific off the coast. And we had a nice meal, and sometime later, one of my students said, would I like to go snorkeling? I said, oh, that would be great. So he paid a guy in a boat, and he took me out with about 10 other members of the public, no other Aikido people. And we went for miles and miles and miles out into the Pacific. And then we came across this reef, which was underwater, and we went snorkeling. And I was having a great old time with the coral and the fish, and coming up every so often, waving to people, hi, going down again. I could hold my breath for a long time. And then after about half an hour, I came up and everything was okay. I went down again, mooching around. And when I finally came up, nobody was there. Really, this is absolutely true. And I thought, and there was a little bit of rock under the water, part of this reef, which is maybe 12 inches under the water. And I was holding it, thinking, they wouldn't have left me. No, they couldn't have left me. 10 minutes later, I think they've left me. Half an hour later, they've definitely left me. And someone had said to me, oh, the sharks don't come in till later on to feed. And it was later on. I was getting a bit, well, I wasn't happy. And I pulled myself together, centered myself. I couldn't see land in any direction at all. I didn't know where the land was. And I thought, oh, well, I'm going to die. That's it. And I calmly hung onto this rock, thinking, this is it. I'm either going to die of exposure, or I'm going to drown, or I'm going to be eaten by some nasty creature. Then way in the distance, I saw what I thought was a boat, a little boat. And I watched it for quite a while, and it didn't seem to be moving. It was at least over half a mile away. I'm not the best of swimmers. And I thought, oh, anyway, I'm going to go for it. And I swam towards this little boat. And when I got there, I hung on the anchor chain, shouting, help, help, por favor, senor, help me. And somebody popped their head over the side and said in Spanish something like, what are you doing in the middle of the Pacific by yourself? Anyway, I was rescued and I was okay. But during that time, I was clinging to that rock. All sorts of things were going through my mind. And surprisingly, they went through my mind very, very calmly and carefully. And somehow it was okay to die, somehow. But I didn't die, obviously. Another time in 1992, quite a while ago, when Pablo Escobar was running around loose in Colombia, we got on a plane leaving Colombia, leaving Bogota, and after about half an hour, they announced, please stay calm, there's a bomb on the plane. What? And a few people got up and started putting their coats on. I thought, what? And I found myself and my students also, what are we going to do? And I thought, well, perhaps I should write a letter in case they find my body. And what if? And then I suddenly thought, well, my what if might even suddenly go bang at any moment. And we were all flying and waiting for the plane to blow up, quite simply. And we were diverted to an island called Santo Domingo in the Caribbean. Luckily, we landed and we had to run away from the plane. The plane was surrounded by fire engines and armored vehicles. And one of the technicians told one of my students that they found the bomb inside, screwed behind a panel in one of the toilets. And the timing mechanism hadn't kicked in. So I've had quite a few experiences like this. And each time, somehow, my aikido training has kicked in, and everything's been okay.
So are you a bit of a fatalist?
I'm not quite sure what that means, but I don't think so.
So, I mean, you've had, shall we say, some close shaves. Do you think it was meant to be that you got through those, or no, it's just that's what life threw at you?
Well, that's what life has thrown me. At that very moment, or at each moment of those experiences, my attitude has been, this is it, here, now, this moment. No past, no future, only now.
Yes. That would teach you to be a bit mindful, I guess.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you're trying to give some key messages to the world about what you would like people to be doing with their aikido from your pearly cloud, what would you be telling people?
This is something that was told to me very many years ago by, and I regret to my shame I've forgotten his name, the founder of Wado Karate, which I had breakfast with him in Dublin many years ago. He told me three things. And one of the things he told me was, see yourself from the top to the bottom. In other words, deep, profound, honest self-observation. Then by understanding yourself as a human being, then you have much more chance of understanding other human beings. Everybody, or almost everybody, wants to be right. And everybody has their opinion about what is right and what is wrong. And one of the things that I have learned is just to step back from this. Maybe everybody's right. And in most situations, well, some situations, it doesn't really matter. For instance, if you see children making sandcastles on the beach, and the bully comes along and kicks the sandcastles to pieces, that little child will be absolutely upset and inconsolable about sand. So lots of the things that we worry about and think are so important in our lives are just sand. So to be able to step back, see yourself, watch your own emotions, don't get carried away with them. and help people and love people.
Mm. So that was kind of the message that Osensi gave, that, you know, kind of love is at the heart of it.
Absolutely.
Doesn't necessarily seem to be, shall we say, central to a lot of the Aikido world, or is that not your feeling?
I think, for instance, in certain situations, not that I particularly believe in corporal punishment, but people who have children, for instance, in order to put them on the right road, you might just give their legs a slap at the odd occasion. And you love your children. You don't want to slap them, but you do so in order to put them on the right track. And you do so lovingly, or one should. And it's a little bit like that. I used to be like that, quite hard. In fact, I was thought to be very hard when I was a young man. But at that time, it was kind of acceptable. And my thoughts were to try to help my students along the way. These days, it's not acceptable. And quite simply, my methods of teaching are totally different.
Better or worse?
So much more what people would think are considerate. But in fact, maybe the old hard way was quicker, but the gentle way is much more comfortable for people. And I think it's become unacceptable to be really hard in the way one teaches these days.
Yeah.
Gladly so.
Yeah. I think there are probably students that would benefit from that hard school approach, but if you're trying to get more people involved, then maybe that doesn't always work.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to open up the mics, and Rob, if you can keep your eyes on who's going to put their hand up, I will too. We'll see what questions come our way. So people, if you want to ask a question, this is the time to do it, or comments or observations. I can't believe we're not going to get a few questions.
There will be.
Go on then, Steve, have you got one?
Yeah, I remember now where I've met the gentleman, or years and years ago, at Chiba's, one of his summer schools here. And I'm going back years because it was the big golden era then. But I remember Chiba because when he had a bokken in his hand, he was extremely fast and very painful. I would go home with many bruises, because of that. But there's a lot of learning tool with that. And I wondered whether he remembers that he had with the bokken like that.
Perhaps he didn't realize you were blind. That was a bit unkind, but I'm sure Terry can relate.
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, I remember being in the middle of a class, practicing with everybody else, and Chiba Sensei just called me over, and he suddenly attacked me with shomen, and I parried his blow and made ski to his face, and I caught him unawares, probably the only time in his life, and I pulled back immediately and apologized. And so the last thing I wanted to do is poke him in the face with a bokken. Next thing, Chiba Sensei told me, all right, make shomen. So he did exactly the same as I had done, but actually took me off my feet, poked me in the eye with his bokken, blood everywhere. So he took no prisoners.
He was extremely fast.
You had a strong spirit, Terry. Jamie, you had a question.
Yeah, first of all, so wonderful to meet you. Since really great listening to you. Thank you. Question, I love that you said, I wrote it down, I don't stick to the way I was taught at all, right. Which I found very, very wonderful, very energizing. And at the same time, clearly, you have a very, very deep grounding and root in tradition and Aikido tradition, Japanese culture, etc. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the interplay, the dynamic of kind of adhering to tradition, and that it's kind of hierarchical, and maybe kind of in the past with your very with your sense of do what's now and going forward, and giving yourself permission to teach and train as you do. So you know what I'm asking? I wonder if you could just kind of talk about that whole dynamic.
I think I know where you're coming from. I was very strict with myself in the first, let's say, 20, 25 years of my Aikido training, very strict to follow exactly what I was shown in the way that I was shown it. Maybe I didn't quite get that, but there were a few occasions where I did exactly what was shown, and the person was just trying to stop me and nothing was working. And in one case, I was actually teaching and it was a bit embarrassing. And so I had to go away and think, hold on a minute, what's happening here? And as I said at the beginning of this interview, I really believe that mainstream Aikido, as it is taught, is totally necessary. But it should just be a template from which, or a platform from which we can try different ways, find the most efficient way, and go on to develop ourselves in the ways that we weren't taught. So having found certain ways which I view to be more efficient, then I will teach my students those more efficient ways, quite simply, even to how we do forward or backward ukemi.
Sounds fair.
Hope your question.
Well, maybe I'll add on just a little more to the question, which is, you know, she talked about how we kind of were, I've been doing Aikido for 45 years myself. So, you know, we kind of went in this, we were fortunate to be in this sort of more earlier golden age of Aikido as it spread from Japan. And there's so much talk these days about what's the future of Aikido, and then the whole kind of conversation between being more martial about it, and you know, things like MMA or karate seem to have more commercial appeal or whatever, and or all the other that, you know, you're really talking about, which is the self-development, the spiritual aspects through the martial training of Aikido. I'm wondering if you could, I'm very curious about your thoughts about the direction for the future of Aikido and really keeping Aikido alive and growing.
There are many ways to practice Aikido. So for instance, just practicing and cooperating with each other in itself is an absolutely wonderful thing. If husbands and wives and partners did this, there are groups from different countries, I believe Israelis and Jewish people practicing together in total harmony, cooperating with each other. This is fantastic. This is learning to cooperate, and it's wholesome and it's good to do. And then one may think, well, what if somebody isn't helping me? So then you go on to the next layer and find ways that really do work, that are really martial. So I believe that in order to spare life, which we would want to do in a violent situation, in order to spare life, this may sound controversial, you have to have the power to take life. In other words, you have to get your skill levels to a very high level in order to be compassionate. And so I think that practicing the various ways of the way that we practice, for instance, flowing, static, different ways, practicing by attacking each other violently and learning to cope, all these different ways should evolve from a spirituality so that one can maintain one's center, one's composure, one's sense of integrity whilst defending oneself. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa,
Yeah.
you had a question.
Yeah, thank you, Sensei. I'm just wondering what you think Chiba Sensei's legacy is in Aikido in Britain and Aikido in general. I wrote a book about him a couple of years ago, and a lot of it was dealing with that brutality and, you know, is that brutality necessary to train at a high level? So wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I have very mixed thoughts on that. And before you go, give me the name of your book, because I'd be really interested in reading it. I think it depends on the person. For me, I just took everything. I was born just not long after the war. In fact, I was born when the war was finished. And at that time, people had the greatest respect for authority. You respected policemen, doctors, teachers, and whatever they said goes. So Shiba Sensei being an authority was very, for me, I think, looking back, in that whatever he said, I tried to do. And whatever he did to me, I accepted. But you have to think that there may be other, I can't see you at all, by the way, you've blanked off. There may be other people who won't accept that. And I think quite simply, it's up to the individual. People who will accept hard, brutal training perhaps should go on with it until they can't do it anymore. And people who don't want to accept it, then leave it. It's up to the individual. Obviously, there are many kinds of people in the world and in the martial arts, and some people can accept it for part of their life. And then later on in life, they want to change. So I think it's an open question, really, and it's up to the individual. I think that Chiba Sensei's attitude really helped me face the reality of violence and the possibilities of violence, which I hope I can cope with these days. But I wouldn't be able to cope with it if I hadn't had the chance. Also, it gives you the chance to overcome your fear, not just in Aikido, but in life itself. For instance, most people in life, although they won't admit it, they think that they're in harmony with themselves, everything's okay. But suddenly something happens in their life, they lose their job, maybe lose their house, the mortgage goes, lose a partner, something like that, or something happens in their life and the whole state of mind will go to pieces. So quite simply, people's stability, mental stability and feeling of calmness may be an illusion. And the thing is to be able to deal with reality, deal with violence, deal with things going wrong in your life. So for me, dealing with the violence that Chiba Sensei was meted out was very important. Can I tell you all a story, which I have told in public once or twice? I took Chiba Sensei scuba diving off the coast of Anglesey, which is an island in North Wales. And we were underwater going along. This was the first time Chiba Sensei had been scuba diving and everything was going well. Then suddenly I got my foot caught in some netting and in some rope. And I drew my knife to cut myself free. And the moment that I drew my knife, Chiba Sensei went into an underwater hand-me posture and behaved as though I had lured him down underwater to stab him and kill him. And I was so embarrassed and I didn't know what to think. And I said, Sensei, no, blah, 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 and put my knife back. And we got back and he didn't say anything about it and I didn't. But to me, it just showed that he was always ready. I would have thought that he would have known I would be the last person in the world to try and stab him underwater. But no, he wasn't taking any chances.
So I have to ask the question, have you ever had to apply your martial proficiency off the mat?
I think I have, but I can't remember. Really only breaking up fights, I think. I've dived in a few times and people have been fighting each other. I've dived in rather stupidly when they could have both turned on me. When I was a young man, I thought it would be a good idea to work as a bouncer at certain gigs, which I did. Got a lot of experience from that, but I think there's not been any real serious situations like that. There's been some less serious ones where, for instance, I was working in a place and someone decided it would be a good idea to jump out on me to give me a fright. And my body just reacted and I knocked him off his feet and gave him a black eye. and he wasn't happy at all, but I apologized greatly, and it was just a reaction. So really, I haven't had to use my Aikido too seriously. Thank goodness.
So is it fair to say that the major part of the benefit of your Aikido study has been in other aspects of life?
I get great joy through practicing Aikido, and especially with the people that I practice with. And yes, so I get great joy from the actual practice, and also it helps me in my daily life. Obviously, it teaches you to learn from your mistakes. We all make mistakes in life, and it's taught me to learn deeply from them. So yes.
Your lovely wife, Petra, is being very modest and sort of doing whatever she's doing behind you.
She's fantastic.
How has it influenced your relationship with her?
Well, we're madly in love, and she's the light of my life. And we came together through Aikido. And I'm going to tell you something that you may not believe, which is absolutely true. Only the facts have been changed to protect the innocent. No, I'm being serious now. With the Kundalini practice, sometimes very, very strange things happen. And the very, very first time I met Petra, I saw with my own eyes like miniature lightning come from her body into me. And I went, wow, what's this? Stupid woman. And what's going on here?
You have to be careful.
Have to be careful. Yes. And I thought, well, that's amazing, but I wonder why. But something brought us together, and something connected us together, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But it sounds far-fetched, and I don't expect people to believe that.
I think it's normally called Cupid, isn't it?
Quentin, you have a hand raised by Lise Klein.
Is that Andrew? Yeah.
No, Lise Klein has her hand raised.
I think we've covered Lisa. I think it's Andrew now.
Okay.
Andrew?
Oh, hello there. Hi, Terry. Nice to see you
Hi.
again.
Good.
I was intrigued by your story about the boat. Did you ever find out what happened to the boat and why you were left there?
No, I didn't. But it seems they're so laid back that they didn't even have a head count. Actually, the story I heard was somebody said, "Is everybody here?" And they all said, "Yes." And that was it. And so they thought everyone was there.
Brilliant.
I was on the beach having a barbecue, actually. And unfortunately,
Liz and
didn't
Alec. Sorry, finish, Petra.
unfortunately, until he got back and then said, told us about this experience, you know, and, but we didn't really notice you'd gone.
No, I wasn't missed at all. You know.
What happened to the bolts of lightning there? That's what I want to know, Petra, but we'll pass on that. Liz.
Oh, hi. Thank you very, very much for everything you've said this evening. It's really interesting sharing. You'll talk about Aikido, so Aikido having been taught originally in a very hard way. I came to Aikido after it had softened up, and I was taught in a very soft way. But you reminded me of my own experience a very long time ago when I started out in jiu-jitsu, and they very much had that hard knock school of training. And I sort of survived that. I didn't get any drastic injuries or anything, thank goodness. But I remember one guy coming to the dojo. He came because he'd actually been beaten up in a street fight and he wanted to come and defend himself, learned how to defend himself. And he came to the dojo and he started practicing the dojo. And at the end of the session, he said to the teacher, he said, it's ridiculous. He said, I got beaten up on the street. He said, that was bad enough. He said, I've come to this dojo. What's happened to me here is a hell of a lot worse. What's going on? And the teacher just kept a perfectly straight face and said to him, look, you know, what you experienced on the street, there is no difference between there and in the dojo, but in my dojo, you get used to it.
Very good. Nice story. Thank you. Thank you.
So, Terry, do you have a question that you would like to ask us?
What are you guys going to do about making Aikido more popular to the general population?
It is the question of our day, I think. Yeah. I do have some answers, but then I don't think it's right for me to offer them. Anyone else have some thoughts?
Paul does.
Paul.
Yes, as most of you know, what I've been trying to do is take the core of Aikido, make it very simple, very straightforward, and send it out and hope that people will practice that. And then some of them will come to the full practice later on, I hope.
In what kind of format are you sending it out?
Body work, for example, if I've worked a lot with people who've been traumatized, peacemaking, I teach people to experience when they say the word enemy, what are they doing in their body? And if they can change that and do power and love when they say the word enemy, then they can deal with the enemy without making more enemies.
Oh, very positive. Thanks for that. That's great.
Thank you.
Paul has is really good at noticing what's going on in the body and translating that to what maybe you're feeling or thinking. Yeah, he's got a great body of work behind him.
I think it's so necessary in Aikido. Well done. Good.
Anyone else got any thoughts?
I do want to say I looked up the founder of Wado-ryu, it's Hironori Otsuka, Sensei.
Sounds familiar. Thanks for that.
Sure.
Okay. That's good.
I'll chime in. Lisa Sensei and I have been part of a new initiative since last year, since COVID, called the Aikido Solstice Seminars. And so we've been doing 4 seminars a year that bring together a focus on women instructors, but definitely across generations, across cultures, across countries, and across Aikido associations and styles, bringing teachers and topics together that are really relevant. So that's one thing. But the other is Quentin and I are both board members of Aiki Extensions. And we have an upcoming event. It's actually next weekend. There's 2 next weekend and the weekend after called the Aikido Passion and Action Roundtables. Everyone's invited. But we wanted to bring together people, again, from around the world who are sharing their Aikido love stories, sharing our passion for Aikido, how we fell in love with Aikido, how Aikido influences us in our lives. So that's the first one. The first week is the passion part. And then the action is how do we take all of our love for Aikido, which clearly we all have, that's why we're here, take all of our passion for Aikido into action. And that could be locally or, on other levels, and all applying Aikido in our lives, in our work, in our lives. So we want to, bring people together more, and with that focus of bringing out our passion, sharing our passion for Aikido, and how we can bring that into action in our dojos and beyond our dojos.
Oh, well done. It's very, very creative. Very good. I like it.
I think that's the secret, isn't it? It is trying to take the ideas that we learn so powerfully within Aikido into wider society. And if we can find ways of doing that, then we might just make a better world.
Which leads me to ask, Sensei, how did you fall in love with Aikido?
Could you repeat that, please? Sorry.
Which leads me to ask, in the spirit of the upcoming roundtable, how did you fall in love with Aikido?
How did I fall in love with it? My first session, quite simply. And then the love affair just became more and more intense the more I practiced. Simple.
Was it the physical aspect of it, or just, as you said, the community as well?
The physical aspects and the spiritual aspects, the people who were practicing, excuse me, and I think it was my second lesson. I was just sitting in Seiza, and again, a flow of Kundalini energy just went right through me. I didn't know what it was at the time, and it felt so magnificent. And I just said to myself, I will never, ever give this up.
Well, you've been good to your word then.
I'll always keep my word. Yeah.
We'll keep watching.
My
that
apologies.
space.
Robert Sensei is the president of Aiki Extensions, and he's working closely with us on the roundtables.
Well done. Good. I'd like to thank you guys for all your work that you're doing, by the way. It's admirable and it's very, very necessary. So thanks for doing all this. It's really great.
Thank you. thank you for your generosity of time and for sharing your incredible story with us. You are an inspiration, Terry, so that's it's much appreciated. I will simply say to everybody, you're always welcome to attend these sessions. They're not always interviews. We're always looking at ideas within Aikido and following various themes. You might just find you like them. And you're welcome. It's the same room number, same password. So if you made it this time, you can make it next time. So yeah, you are welcome. I am going to just thank you finally. And do you want to say something?
Just to thank you all very much, especially Quentin, for yourself for organising this, and thank you very much to everybody else who's plugged in. So thanks a lot. Stay safe,
Terry.
We will.
Thank you.
And we will make the recording available after the event.
Okay.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you very much.
Don't worry, got those.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Stay safe. Bye.
Yeah.
Quentin.